Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Stephen Falgout.
And I am your other host, Dawn Falgu. Get Recc'd is our podcast where Stephen and I, two siblings, get together and recommend two pieces of media to each other, be it an album, a film, a video game, whatever. And then the next episode, we get together and we discuss each other's recommendations.
In this episode, the big 6-0, we have a theme rec. This theme, of course, we've done for a few years now, which is also kind of crazy to say that we've been doing this podcast for literally years. But it's, of course, our new year, new me. What happened? Where we are going to be looking at two sets of recommendations. I gave recommendations to Dawn, two things, and they gave recommendations to me, two things that either go from good to bad or bad to good. This time, one set of those things, I didn't know how to identify it when we talked about it last time. So I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit. But for the most part, that's really what you need to know.
Yeah, and obviously, everybody is a new person this month. You kind of shed your entire skin every January 1st, sort of like a reptile.
Like a reptile, that's correct.
Underneath that skin, you reveal your new person. We've done this 3 times, and I'm shocked that all of our viewers have chosen to stick around because really, we just get worse every year.
Yeah, that's true. And also, it's crazy that the new person every year still wants to do this podcast.
Well,
Isn't that wild?
It only speaks to the draw of Get Recc'd, that not only do the viewers want to keep watching, but our new people waiting on the inside are so excited to be able to get in on the action. I will say this, though. If ever it seems like Steven or I have chosen to sabotage the podcast, perhaps next year or the year after, you know why. We just happen to have a particularly sneaky individual lying inside of us. Nothing we can do about that.
Yeah, well, what I've done for the past couple of years to kind of alleviate the situation is at 11:59 on 12:31, what I'll do is I'll actually tape the contractual obligation that we have for this podcast to my forehead. So that way, when I shed my skin, then the first thing the new person sees is they're contractually obligated to perform the duties of this podcasting function.
Yes, and they see that paper on the skin that you have shedded.
Right. It's really grotesque, but
yeah, it's the kind of thing you don't want to see pictures of, and the details we will just leave to your imagination. But what we will not leave to your imagination is what happened to our first set of recommendations. Stephen, if you would like to explain what you recommended to me.
Yes, I recommended to you the series of films by resident elf themselves, Will Ferrell. This, of course, is the comedic sequel, an original Anchorman. Anchorman 1, The Legend of Ron Burgundy. Anchorman 2, The Legend Continues. Both Judd Apatow produced. Some early Apatow stuff, honestly, back in kind of the 2000s heyday of Apatow films. So with that, I will hand it over to you to start talking about the first of these, I believe 2003's, 2004's Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy.
Well, so here's the question we have to wonder right off the bat, because as of last episode, as you said, we were not sure what happened to Anchorman. Did it go from good to bad? Did it go from bad to good? So is that the kind of thing we want to reveal right now, or do we want to keep it a secret?
Yeah, I guess let me give a little context, because I've seen Anchorman 1 a few times, and I quite enjoy Anchorman 1. However, it has been a long time since I've seen Anchorman 1, and I didn't have strong memories of all the happenings. I did have strong memories of all the happenings of Anchorman 2, and I remember that movie being incredibly weird. So, first of all, when I gave these two recommendations, I didn't even know how either of these films would honestly hold up. Having watched them again, I think I would probably still say good to less good. Maybe not good to bad, but I would personally say I still enjoy the first film more than the second.
Okay, well, that's a good starting place because it sounds like in the time from the last episode to now, we have one of us has weakened on our position and the other has strengthened, is the way that I will put it. But anyway, yeah. So Anchorman 1. It's hard to separate this movie now from like its place in pop culture, or I should say in meme culture, in the sense that like was it I feel like it would have been around the time that like rage comics and troll faces and stuff were popular that this movie's quotes became like big memes. Though my memory of that entire era is so muddy at this point, but something like that. But it's one of those comedy films where almost every scene contains like a quote that you've heard somebody reference before, except this film, unlike something like a Monty Python or something like that, this film was exclusively referenced in like rage comics and image macros, which makes it like it makes the film feel more dated than it kind of deserves. Because I mean, it's not its fault, but it's just something that I wanted to mention, not just for context, but also because I do think, in a way, that it speaks to the strength of the film as a comedy film. You know, a lot of comedy movies, they try for zingers, they try to be memorable, they try to have like a funny joke that'll stick in your head. But you know, a lot of these movies you watch once and you maybe laugh like 3 times and then you're out and you don't care anymore. It's not actually that common that there's a comedy movie that is like this quotable, and that does speak to some level of quality. I think that like one of the things this movie seems to shoot for a lot is getting in those quotes. Like you can tell there are scenes that are designed so that there will be a quote in that scene that you will remember. And it's good at being that. It's actually very good at being that. Mainly just because the cast is really, really good in this movie. Everybody is perfect for their role. I'm not a huge Will Ferrell fan, as I may have made clear in Will Ferrell Elf, the film where Will Ferrell is an elf. Though, given that Will Ferrell was an elf, well, a human elf, in Will Ferrell Elf, it does make it a little bit different because this time Will Ferrell is an Anchorman and Will Ferrell Anchorman. And it is a little bit different, but he does play the role really well. He's very good at delivering these kind of bumbly, awkward comedic characters, and he's good in this role. And the other comic actors, none of whose names I am remembering at the moment, are all good in their roles. I guess I'll let you talk about the cast of characters here.
Yes, that would be Christina Applegate, Paul Rudd, Steve Carell, David Koechner, I believe, and of course Fred Willard, who is dearly missed. They all, really, that whole cast of kind of Ron Burgundy and his crew of characters all play their role really well. Now, I will say, speaking of roles, these are definitely like very specific role-based performances. Like they are very pigeonholed into like what their character is. And it's a little unfortunate that I would say for sure this film, there are absolutely aspects that have not aged very well. I mean, really, Steve Carell's character, the whole joke is has some mental retardation. And like that is his character bit. And that's like played as a joke. Now, I do think Steve Carell, he gives a really funny performance here, and there's some great lines coming from his character, like how he loves the lamp. That's a good one.
Yeah, I just want to say about that, I really wish it wasn't contextualized in the way that it is, because it's only contextualized as that in the very, very beginning of the film, where he specifically says that, and even like the way he delivers it is supposed to be funny, which was just like a really
Right.
but like
And actually, I was going to say just quickly, and I know we're not talking about the second film, but I actually think they do a better job of that specifically going into taking that character into the second film.
Yeah, regardless, though, I will
Whereas,
say, after that point, I do think that his character kind of steals the show in a lot of scenes. Like, and it's funny because he actually doesn't have that many lines in this movie, which is something that I like. I appreciate a lot after watching the second one, especially. Like, a lot of the joke with him is that kind of comedy of, like, you know, being too on the nose, too obvious, saying, like, innocuous things in a situation where they don't apply. You know, that's like it's kind of easy comedy, and it's also kind of obvious when you just do it a lot. And I like that this movie doesn't really use him too much. You'll have a whole scene where everybody's arguing or talking, and he will get like one line in, and it's always very funny. And also his performance is just really, really good. But yeah, it's that extra context they add to him where it's like, it just kind of makes the whole thing feel weird, and obviously problematic. I want to say, though, on that note, because this is probably the biggest thing I noticed about both of these movies, and I think it's something that gets like way worse in the second one. But this movie's plot is set in the 1970s, I think, right? Yeah.
yep.
1970s network news, or I don't know the words for fucking TV in the 70s, but whatever. Local news.
Not network.
Yeah,
local
not
news.
network. Local news, right. It's the context of the movie's story is like the transitioning from a male-dominated career field into one that is now allowing women in, as Will Ferrell's main competitor in the movie, his main foil anyway, is also his wife also, or whatever. It's kind of weird.
No, just love interest here.
Okay. Right, that's right. Well, anyway. The main crux of the film is that, like, this entire cast of male anchors are really angry that a woman is now taking an anchor role. And so that, like, I actually really like that setup, because I think there's a lot of really great satire you could do with that. There's a lot of great commentary you could do with that could apply to, you know, a whole number of things today, or in the day that this came out. And it's just like a perfect context to set up some really intelligent satire that this movie, like, does not even try to do. And I almost felt like it was weird that they even chose to tackle this topic if they weren't gonna, like, try to do something transgressive, because they really don't. Like, a lot of the jokes around this, like, you could say that, like, the sexist guy is the butt of the joke, but it usually just ends up like he does something silly and awkward because, you know, he doesn't respect her, and then she sticks it to him by being like the girl boss, you know. And that's basically like all of those scenes. And on top of that, Will Ferrell's character, Ron Burgundy, he isn't that much better than all of his colleagues in this respect, and he obviously has, like, no respect for her either, and that's a big crux of the film, and yet they still fall in love, and they have a sex scene, and it's just like, I don't know why they did that, if it wasn't just to center the movie ultimately around Ron Burgundy's struggle with having to deal with this, as opposed to, you know, the actual broader social climate that was going on here. And I found that probably the most disappointing thing about this movie, because I feel like that could have been a really good direction for the film to go in, and it just kind of refused to.
Yeah, and I just want to say quickly here, because this is going to be pertinent when we talk about the next one. I completely agree with you. However, it is kind of resolved by the end. Like, the I guess the larger moral is he learns to respect her as a co-anchor and like as a professional, and their kind of relationship blossoms and ultimately they get married. Right? That's like it does tie up, and but I completely agree they don't tackle it well. But I'm only saying that because it will be pertinent when we talk about the next film as to why one of the reasons why I really didn't like where they go with that one.
I understand why you're bringing that up. Yeah, no, it like yeah. So I don't want to say that the film is like explicitly sexist. My only point is that it doesn't try to do anything with it, and that's what bothers
Although
me.
it definitely is. Like they use it as a joke pretty much from the beginning.
Oh yeah,
Like I think about the Sex Panther scene and like all of the guys try to get with her and like but she does like hold her own, and I think that there's some
I it feels
credit
like
there.
here's what it feels like to me. It feels like they thought they were saying something positive with it, but they weren't very intelligent about the way that they structured the humor. Like if you want to do this and you want the cast of sexist male characters to be like the leads, you really shouldn't be making them charming or relatable or likable. And I feel like you actually could get a lot more comedy out of that too. Like as it stands, it's basically a cast of bumbling dudes. You know, they're like bumbling and silly, but you know, you love them at the end of the day. And it's like that on top of the fact that one of them like literally like sexually assaults her. Well, I mean he sexually harasses her, however you want to put it, but he touches her breast like just in the workplace, and it's just like, haha, that was funny because then she punched him in the dick, so he got what he deserved in that scene. But like, you know, and that by the way, one of the main reasons I'm talking about this isn't just because I think this movie suffers so badly for it, although it kind of does, but all of this gets way worse in the second one. So that's just setting that up. But yeah, aside from that, I will say like I think there's a lot of things that this movie does do really well. The costuming and set design and the look of the film really, really, really make it feel like it almost came out of the 70s. There's a lot of ways in which it really puts you into the time that I thought were really well done, and also I like that this movie has this kind of absurdism to it, but it's like really on the down low, and it only happens like 2 or 3 times where the film's just going like just getting ridiculous. They really don't overplay that angle in this movie. I think it's something that you kind of think of when you think of Anchorman, because in a lot of ways I feel like this movie and movies like it really inspired like internet sketch comedy humor in the early 2010s, and so in my memory anyway, I think of this movie as being super absurd and ridiculous, but it really only is in like 2 scenes, and
Which
I
the second
appreciate
one
that they
is.
yeah. And I appreciate that they hold back on that a lot in this movie, because it does make those scenes a lot funnier for it, since it's not something you've come to expect the movie to do.
Yeah, and I will talk about some of my favorite scenes, like the there this is still a very quotable movie, and a lot of that humor, a lot of that small humor kind of still holds up. It's been so quoted that I can't say that like the quoted lines are still as funny as they were like the first or second time I viewed the movie, but there's a lot of little things that kind of crop up that have really great humor, very humorous. Also, there's a lot of actors that just randomly show up in this movie, which is kind of fun to see. But the scene where they're asking Ron Burgundy like what love is like, and so they all sing Afternoon Delight together. That's a really great one. And the other one that I really still very much enjoy, that's probably one of the more well-known scenes, is that backyard brawl between Ron Burgundy's news team and all the different news stations that show up. First, it's between Ron Burgundy and Vince Vaughn's character, like the number 1 and number 2 team in the ratings. But then like Telemundo shows up and a different news organization, and they have this like 4-way brawl. At one point, like Steve Carell's character pitchforks a guy, like throws a pitchfork and kills a guy who's on a horse. It just is like so wildly out there, and I still find it so funny.
Yeah, totally. And that is one of the main scenes where the, movie just goes into ridiculousness, which it does really well. Um, So yeah, I don't actually have much more to say about this movie because I don't want to take a crazy amount of time on it, and I feel like we covered all the bases that we're going to come back to.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to mention is I still really like the bit, and it's kind of like one of the primary bits where no matter what's on the teleprompter, Ron Burgundy will read it. I just think that's so funny. Like he'll read question marks, or if they put it in all caps, he'll read it like it's all caps, and it like ultimately is his downfall that he just reads anything off the teleprompter.
Yeah, the payoff to that is just great too.
And the other one that was kind of a smaller bit that I liked a lot was when he gets fired ultimately from the news station because he reads something from the teleprompter. But then when he gets the call back, he like kind of goes in like Superman style, goes into a stall and comes back out as Ron Burgundy, and he blows this war horn for his news team, and they're all just like in the same room with him, and they're like, "Yay, we've been here the whole time." I guess I think that's a pretty good one.
Yeah, lots of great gags in this movie, and I think we will go over our overall thoughts at the very end, so we should move on
Yep.
to Anchorman 2. So Anchorman 2 came out almost 10 years later, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Anchorman was a movie that was kind of like a sleeper hit. Like, it took a while to really catch on, but certainly around, the 2010s, the late 2000s, it was really obviously like a huge movie, so capitalize on that, make a sequel. And I do remember watching this around the time it came out, but I was shocked at how much of this movie I didn't remember. Like, I remembered one thing from this movie, and that was it. And I can see why, watching it. So, I don't know. It sounds like Steven may have softened on his opinion on this matter, but I really think this movie is just terrible. Like, I don't even... I'm not a giant fan of the first Anchorman, as I may have made it clear, but like that movie is head and shoulders well above this movie. So a lot of the things that I took issue with in the first movie are way worse here. So in this film, the main social context that it takes place in is the transition into 24-hour news, which, by the way, is a really, really smart direction, I think, for it. It's something that justifies it as a sequel, and I like where they went with that. And so Ron Burgundy is rehired to work at GNN, which is the new 24-hour news network. Nobody thinks it's going to work out. And
well, wait, can I just interrupt really quick, because I kind of want to talk about why I mentioned the fact that it wrapped up last time, because the way this movie starts is Ron and Veronica, who are now married, they are co-anchors for a network news station in New York. Harrison Ford is in this movie for whatever reason and promotes Veronica but fires Ron. And Ron can't believe it. Like, basically everything that happened in the first movie, all of the character development that happened there for him to like kind of respect her and ultimately, I guess, marry her, honestly, just immediately gets washed away within the first 5 minutes of the movie. Like, literally, it's almost the exact way that it played out when he found out that she was going to be on the station, period. And they split, and he gets fired, and he has a son even, and that's when he goes to work at SeaWorld, and then kind of that's when like the whole port that you just mentioned stood up. But that just didn't make any sense to me. Like, I understand from a character, like from a from a humor standpoint, they might have thought they needed to do that to be able to allow Ron to be that like silly sexist guy, and this movie even worse, sexist and racist guy. But it just didn't make any sense to me from a character standpoint,
Yeah, and well, but what it does make sense though is a thematic standpoint, because this film decides to double the fuck down on all of that, and it's crazy because I don't even know why. I really I agree with you that as far as the characters are concerned, that conflict was settled, not just him and Veronica, but also his respect for women, like career women. That was something that was supposed to be over. But in order to, I guess, go forward with all of the terrible jokes they wanted to tell in this movie, they had to just do away with that. Yeah, this movie gets real weird. It's interesting that the one from 2004 is considerable has honestly aged considerably better, not just as a comedy, but also like socially, culturally, like than this one has. And I don't know why they decided to do this, but in this movie, these four characters here, who, you know, they were sexist in the first film, that was a part of their character, that was like kind of their downside, that was what you made fun of them for, sort of. In this movie, they're not only that, but they are like super racist, super homophobic. There's even a trans joke in there, which was real cute. And like, this is honestly the main like joke for at least three of the, or at the very least two of them. Ron Burgundy in this movie has been reduced to literally just the worst guy ever. I don't even know why, because in the first movie, he wasn't even like the worst one, and I feel like they kept him from being that because it would make him a little bit more likable, but in this one, he is terrible. And then his coworker, the guy in the cowboy hat, what the hell's the character's name? I forget their names all the time. But the guy who goes Champ, that's right. The guy who goes whammy, yeah. His whole thing is like he is a super super racist, like sort of, you know, Southerner stereotype. So all right.
And he stands up a chicken shop, but they serve bats or something. Like, it's this weird throwaway gag that really isn't funny and kind of just gross. Like, it doesn't even, they don't never go back to it or anything.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because we have, you know, the early part of the movie, they're all seeing what everybody's doing now, and you know, it's whatever. The funniest thing here was Brick's.
Yeah, it's very Blues Brothers. We're gonna get the band back together.
Yeah, and I really really like Brick's scene here. Where he's at his own funeral, and he thinks he's dead. Very funny. Okay, that was one of my favorite Brick moments in Anchorman 2. But there's so many things to talk about how this movie got worse. So I'll finish up on the thing I was talking about, I guess. The main love interest in this movie-ish, I mean, Veronica becomes that towards the end, but is their boss or their manager, who is a black woman. And that's the joke. That's the joke. Like, she shows up in one scene, and everybody is just terribly racist to her. And it's really not that funny. Like, I mean, I can see, like, okay, I guess the joke was supposed to be that they were being racist. Is it? I don't know. But I almost can't afford that much. I almost can't afford that much credit to the movie, because just like in the last movie, she becomes his love interest. But this time, you know, in that movie, like, Ron Burgundy kind of let her into it. Not this time. This time, he gets called into her office where she tries to have sex with him because she's so attracted to the guy who was horribly, horribly racist to her in like the last scene. And from here on, we get a great, hilarious, awesome moment where Ron Burgundy goes to her house and he tries to fit in with the black family by doing black stereotypes. And it was quite cringe, I gotta say. Yet another scene, by the way, which is a complete throwaway, because as soon as it's over, nobody faces any consequences for that, which is kind of a running theme in this movie. That happens a lot. I really, like, it's one of those things where I don't even know why they chose to do this. I really don't. It really does just seem like they just kind of thought racism was funny and wanted to include it in the movie. Like, it isn't even really the social force that's the main social force in this movie, unlike in the last one where sexism kind of was. This time it isn't. It's just there.
Yeah, and by racism, it's just like he sees her and goes black, and that's like the joke.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a little bit cringe.
I think why I softened on this movie is like, this movie is completely absurd, like more than the first one in the worst way. Like, it doesn't have any, like, it has structure, but not really. It actually just rips a lot of the same jokes as the first one. Although I did get a lot of humor out of, like, because I'll just say they do the fight scene again from the first one, basically. But now, like, all these network news stations are showing up. Like, History Channel shows up and MTV, and some of that I thought was pretty funny. Like when there's the ghost of Stonewall Jackson and he's like ripping people's souls out of their bodies.
Also, Kanye West cameo was cute.
Yeah, Kanye West. But the reason why I softened on this is because, one, I really like anytime Steve Carell's on screen in these Anchorman movies, it's really funny. And what's her name? Kristen Wiig plays like Brick's love interest, and they're pretty much the same character. And also, Kristen Wiig's character's last name is Lasname, which I thought was funny. And they have like just really great moments together. Like they go out on a date, and their date is just like in front of a soda machine in a laundromat. And the other thing that I really liked about this movie is I like the concept of this movie. Like conceptually, I really like the step that they took to take it from the last film to this one. And there are a lot of really great like throwaway gags as they're manning kind of this 24 hours news cycle. Because what happens is their team gets put on the grave shift, the 2 a.m. spot, I think. And they have this bet with James Marsden, whose character Jack Lime is like the best news anchor in America at the time. And essentially what they do is they just start telling people news that they want to hear. So it's this very funny satire on like kind of the 24-hour news cycle. Like basically Ron Burgundy created what we know as the 24-hour news cycle now. Like they start following car chases and they only show home runs and that sort of thing. They have Champ go out in the middle of like tornadoes or whatever, although he just goes out in New York and says the wind is really, really strong. But there's a lot of good throwaway stuff in that 24-hour news stuff that's like complete throwaway. Like there's the bit where they throw to Brick and he's in front of the green screen, but it's St. Patrick's Day and he's wearing green. So he thinks that he doesn't have legs anymore.
Yeah.
There's stuff like that I like from this movie that brought it up a little bit. Because in my memory, I just remember this being this weird, absurdist concept. And a lot of it is because a lot of the movie hinders on Ron Burgundy losing his eyesight and then like learning how to love again. And he raises a shark or something.
Well, it's really just the end of the movie. Like the last like quarter or third of the movie just decides to become like, yeah, like an absurdist comedy. Okay, so a few points. I agree there are good bits during the 24-hour stuff. There are still funny jokes in this movie scattered throughout here or there, but I actually think plot-wise, this movie is a complete mess. Even before it like decides to be. Like this movie just goes all over the place. It's really, really poorly paced, really poorly structured. It's not like, and a lot of the main through lines will get interrupted for really long periods of time, only like for us to come back to them later. One of the biggest things is the main moral of the film. I suppose this is a spoiler, who cares? One of the main moral of the film where Ron Burgundy decides, you know what, I can't do this. This isn't real news. And he really never learned that lesson, ever. Like, never. He never learned it. All he learned is that he needs to take his family a little bit more seriously. But then he like decides to turn it into a lesson about news, which was really, really out of nowhere. And there's other things like that in here too, which maybe they're not as out of nowhere, but whatever led up to them happened like 30 minutes ago, and you just kind of forgot. A lot of poor pacing. But it's funny because the movie decides to actually break apart in the last third or quarter or whatever, when, yeah, it gets very absurd. Ron Burgundy goes blind, and they nurse a shark, and they sing a song for the shark. And look, here's the thing about all this, right? Like, to me, it didn't really work, because it feels like the absurdism that the first Anchorman had, which, again, was not much of the movie, inspired a lot of, like, internet sketch comedy humor and that kind of thing, and That and like Adult Swim, you know. Um, and this movie basically then takes from that, from what it inspired, and ends up feeling a lot like a YouTube sketch comedy in the sense that it's like almost not funny at all. Like them bursting out into song for the shark just felt like the most try hard thing. Like, what's something we can do that would be really out of place and absurd? What if we put a musical number in it? Like, okay, and it's like not funny at all. And I get this will work for some people and won't work for others, but I just didn't really feel like this movie's like absurdist angle was that well done. It felt kind of like writers sitting around a table like, this is like a funny idea in my head, let's just do it. And then it just kind of isn't. That on top of what you mentioned with the fight, which is really just a rehash of the first one, except more. And there are good gags in it. Like the fact that there's like a, you know, like a full-on practical effect minotaur. That's great. It's just like
from the History Channel, and they're like, wait, that's mythology, not history.
Yeah.
The other one that I like, the other one that I like is like one of the running gags is that Greg Kinnear's character, who Veronica ultimately dates after Ron. He says he's a psychologist, and the running gag is that they think that he can read minds. And he basically saves Ron Burgundy in that fight because it turns out, yes, he does actually have mind powers.
Yeah, which was a good payoff. So yeah, it's not a bad scene, but again, it's still kind of a rehash. Like, it isn't anything terribly new, and I don't even know if it's as funny as the first one. So yeah, that's the thing about this movie. I feel like it's a big mess. It in a lot of ways rehashes stuff from the first movie, but does it worse. It also looks like a TV movie. I noticed that. It has very like TV lighting. Minor point. But anyway, to me on the whole, it feels like it's a lot worse because everything that I kind of didn't like about the first one is way worse here, and everything I did like about the first one just isn't as good here. I also think they rely too much on Brick this time around. I just want to make mention of that because I pointed out how in the first film he isn't overused. They only have like one line per scene or so, but now Brick is like one of the main centerpieces because they know he's the fan favorite character. Which is kind of the curse of being a cult classic movie, is that when you make a sequel, now you have all this fan expectation, which they try to live up to, and it just doesn't really work for me. So that's my final point about this movie. If you have anything to say, go ahead, and then we should say what happened and finish our thoughts.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I would say, like plot-wise, is there's some weird plot point where the station is owned by an Australian guy who owns like a mega corporation, and it turns out a subsidiary of that mega corporation is like an airliner, and pieces of the airplane have been falling from the sky, and Paul Rudd's character was going to run a piece on it, but due to corporate synergy and he's like evil, they won't let him run it. And it doesn't really get resolved necessarily. Like, it just kind of is a thrown away, like, this guy is going to be the villain, but then no, not really. Ron Burgundy just kind of walks out the studio without any repercussion or anything.
Yeah, I mean, he says that that airliner sucks in his final speech, and then the Australian guy rages.
Right.
That's it. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, yeah. So, okay. Overall thoughts on the first Anchorman. I will start there. Then I will go to the second. Then I will tell you what I think happened, and Stephen will do the same. So, the first Anchorman is a funny movie. I don't like it that much, though. It is one thing to say that it suffered from, being overquoted, and that is definitely true. But even aside from that, because I don't blame the movie for that, I don't really think it's that great. But as like a quotable comedy with some really good bits in it, it definitely does work. I would give it a 6. Also, I'm just not a huge fan of Will Ferrell. But yeah, definitely a pretty decent movie. Anchorman 2, I will give a 3. Yeah, I'll give it a 3. It does have some funny jokes in it, but overall, it is a weird, bloated mess with some really, really awful stuff in it, a lot of terrible jokes, and some really unfunny scenes. And it's just worse in pretty much every way. So I actually have an interesting answer to what happened here, and I kind of hinted at it, which is really just cult classic status. You know, Anchorman 1 became this cult classic, this meme legend, you know, and the sequel happened because of that. So instead of making a sequel that follows supernaturally from the first one, or that, you know, is like original and funny and clever, it's basically just what can we do to up everything from the last one that we think people liked. And you're never going to succeed doing that. It's just never going to happen. They played way too much to expectations, I think, like especially with Brick, because they know he's the funny guy that everybody thinks is funny. So let's just shove him in the movie as much as possible. You know, the fight scene, that was funny the first time and everybody loved it. So let's just do it again. And stuff like that. But the film really didn't have much justification to exist. Even with the 24-hour news cycle story being a natural step from the first one, it certainly doesn't feel like this movie would have happened if it weren't for its meme status. And that is what I think happened. But yes, I do think this went from good to bad. And that is, I will let Steven wrap up his.
Yeah, the first one I think I'm a little, I got like a little more, but I'd still probably only give it like a 7.5, something like that. I think that it holds up in some regards. A lot of those quotable moments are still very quotable. It has some very good bits. I would easily put it as one of the better of the Apatow films, and especially coming from that decade. But as we've kind of already talked about, it doesn't hold up as well as other comedies definitely have. And the second one, I used to really just not enjoy it at all. I'm a little more lenient on it having watched it again. I'd probably go 4.5 to a 5. I don't recommend watching it. I don't think it's very good. Anchorman 1 is definitely the better one, so I definitely still go good to bad, or good to not good is probably more as I would say it. Because Anchorman 2 does have some good bits in there, and you know, if you really, really enjoy the first one, I guess it's kind of worth a watch just for the oddity of it. But ultimately, I think really what happened is kind of exactly what you said. Anchorman 1 became a cult classic, an icon of that era. And when it came time to do the sequel, they just decided to take all of the parts of 1 and ramp them up to 11. But they didn't do any of that very well at all. And I really think it starts with when all of the character development that Ron had in the first movie is thrown away within the first 5 minutes. Once that happens, it pretty much goes completely downhill from there, because his character reverts to like a state pre even the first movie, I would say, because his character becomes even worse than he was ever in the first one. So ultimately, you know, I don't know if I'd say I'd recommend either of the movies. I think that Anchorman 1 kind of still holds up. It's worth a watch maybe once again, just to kind of see how it aged. But ultimately, I don't think these are either of the best comedies ever.
All right, and we should move on to what I recommended to you, Steven, if that's all right.
Yep, let's do it.
All right, so I recommended to Steven the band Green Day, who I said went from, I think the way I put it was the furthest amount of good to the furthest amount of bad, with Dookie, their third album, really their breakout, major label debut at least, but it was their third album in 1994, bestseller pop punk classic, to 2020's just phenomenal Father of All record. Now, I should note that we have discussed American Idiot before, which, had we not have done that, I would have included it as well. I think it definitely bridges the gap between these eras of Green Day. But since we've already talked about it, hopefully we can include that a little bit in our analysis of what happened. And I will leave it to you to talk about 1994's Dookie.
And I think when we talked about it last, I've never been the biggest Green Day fan. But from what I remember, after having listened to American Idiot the full way through, I became more of a fan than I had been to that point. So I just want to put that context before I start talking about Dookie, which I enjoyed considerably. I think it is an amazing punk pop album. And it pretty much has every big hit from that group in the 90s on it. And some that still get tons of airplay, honestly. But there's just such a raw emotion coming from Dookie, like just a intensity from the lyrics and from all aspects of the album from top to bottom that I really enjoy. I don't know if I enjoy it more than American Idiot, but I think that it feels different enough to say that I can kind of put it in that same level of enjoyment, and that I enjoyed it a lot. And it kind of, this album kind of recontextualized Green Day for me. Because this album really touches on a lot of things that I think are very interesting, a lot of very heavy topics, but not so heavy that it's like, it's unlistenable. It's like very consumable. Obviously, since it had a lot of air time and a lot of airwave play. And what's kind of crazy about it is like you don't even really think about this being in that time frame, right? Like I feel like although Green Day were very big in the 90s, it wasn't really until American Idiot that they kind of became like this public presence. And I think that was partially due to the fact that punk and then kind of like scene music and all that stuff really took off going into the 2000s with Green Day and other bands of the ilk. So like listening back to this, it's like, it's so experiential. I wouldn't say it's necessarily different than what had come before. There's obviously a lot of punk influence coming into this album, but they really have their own sound and their own identity, and it's just so strong here. There's such a presence, and there's like this quirkiness, this oddity to it. Like as you get to the kind of like the final track, like in the end, and FOD, there's like just this strange rawness to it that's like playful in a way. But all of the tracks here stand up on their own, and there's a really great progression as you're going from track to track as well. And then obviously, I mean, I think it goes without question because these get a ton of playtime too, but those hits that came off this album are just so good. When I Come Around is just such an amazing song. It really is. And I would say that about all the tracks here. And this is kind of the first time that I've listened to this album all the way through, and it just, I really just found it incredible, honestly.
Yeah, Dookie's one of my favorite albums. This is a top 10 record for me, which I've only come to realize this year. I've loved this album for a long time, but one of the things you touched on that people don't often mention about this album is that emotion that is in this record. And it's, it's not something you think about when you think about Green Day. And certainly back then, Green Day's image and perception was that they were like a snot-nosed, bratty group, and like, they sound like it, yeah. And certainly some of their hits from the 90s, not on this album, but like on Insomniac, like, Brain Stew and stuff like that, do kind of play into that aspect a little bit more. But when you actually get into the lyrics and the topics that Billie Joe writes about on this album, it's all super personal stories. And that's either stuff about relationships or his bisexuality or his anxiety. And these are topics that come up throughout the record. Like Basket Case, the biggest hit from this album. Also the best song from this album. Just a fucking stunner of a song. This song, I think people hear it or heard it and just kind of took it as angsty. But when you actually look into it, Billie Joe's talking about like the intersection between his intense, overwhelming anxiety such that he feels like he feels like he's going insane, and also his sexuality in the middle verse. And it's like really, really brilliant and really, really strong and very, very personal song. And people I don't think a lot of people always recognize that about this album. There's also the song Coming Clean, which is about coming out to his parents as bi. And so like all that stuff's there, stuff like moving away from his old home, and relationships and telling assholes to fuck off, like all the assholes in his life. Really empowering stuff there as well. So that is a quality that Green Day possessed that they don't always get credit for, but I think it's what made a lot of these early records so powerful. Like, because for one thing, the music on them is insanely enjoyable. Their brand of pop punk is really what I think pop punk is really pop punk at its best. You know, pop punk does get a lot of flack because there are a lot of terrible bands in the genre, but Green Day, especially on this album, really just blends a great amount of melody into these punk anthems, and they make really anthemic and really enjoyable songs. And I do think that punk is great. Is a great place to insert this amount of melody and these hooks and things like that. I think it really works. Also, the bass playing on this album is just incredible. The bass ends up carrying a lot of these songs, particularly Longview, but even the more straightforward tracks, the bass is kind of the primary instrument here. And Mike Dirnt is just incredible. The drumming is amazing. I mean, performances are incredible, the lyrics are incredible, and the album flow is incredible. And the one other thing as well that you mentioned is that, you know, this album is really like a hit machine. I mean, all 5 of these radio singles, Welcome to Paradise, Longview, Basket Case, She, and When I Come Around, are all like radio staples, both of their time and today. If you're listening to any alt-rock station, you are going to hear these songs a lot. And these songs are incredible singles. They stand up on their own just phenomenally. But what's great is that when you put them into the album, they don't stand out in that way. Like they feel like they are meant to fit in this record. And really, all of these songs, or at least almost all of them, have single potential on their own. It's what makes this such an enjoyable record. Like, every song stands out. You know, people will say sometimes that it's kind of samey. That's a criticism that it gets, which I think is kind of a lazy critique, because I think all of the song, or many of the songs, have a songwriting quirk or something about them that differentiates them. You know, the only track that maybe kind of blends in is Sassafras Roots, which is still like a super great song. But they do a great job of pacing it such that every song does stand out on its own, especially towards the end where the album, where the songs start getting shorter and the pace just ramps up and up until the finale, FOD, which is like, you know, an acoustic song that then bursts into like a punk song at the end. And I think it's a super, super great record, start to finish, on like from every single conceivable angle.
Yeah, and I would say, just touching back on one thing you mentioned, I think that some of that legibility, some of that readability, some of that just general ability for a lot of those songs to kind of carry into chart singles are probably also why, and just sort of an upbeat general nature of this album is probably why a lot of that, the emotional aspect of the lyrics and the playing, the guitars, the bass, like all of it combined, get lost. I could easily see that being the case because, you know, it's heavy like really heavy personal topics, but it's all played in a, you know, in that kind of like snot nose, very upbeat, very positive way, which, first of all, I will say, like, the conflict of those two is the dichotomy of that is super interesting, first of all, but I also can see why that would make a lot of that, the portion of that album, get lost. But what's really great about a really great record like this one is like there are absolutely levels to this thing, which at like surface value, especially if you're just coming off of hearing singles on the radio, I don't know if you would pick up on that. I don't know if you'd be able to say that. I don't know if it reads like that. But what I found so captivating about this record is that, like, it's absolutely there, and not something that I expected from this band at all, from like my time with this band, honestly. And like, plus the fact that this is one of their earliest records, right? Like the first mainstream record, but even past that, like one of their earliest records, that there was like that level of depth.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just tons of personality, too. They sound like a very hungry band at this point. You know, they just signed to a major label, and they sound like they have everything in line, and they're, like, ready to take over the world, which they did. I mean, this album is one of the best-selling albums of all time, and I don't think it's a negative thing at all that, you know, some of the more personal angles are easily missed on this album. You know, it being so catchy and hooky is a big part of what makes it great. And I think that they handle all of that in just such a great balance. Yeah, and it's just really, 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 really great. And I think we should move on then, yeah, to the next album we're going to talk about.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, so yeah, the next album is Father of All. This is the most recent Green Day album. The alternative title is Father of All Motherfuckers, but you don't want to have those swear words, in a major label record. It's you might not sell as much. And I think they were a little worried about that. They stuck that nice barfing unicorn over it, which I think is really really awful. But anyway, this album came out in February last year. It's pretty recent. And it dropped after, I think, 4 years of no new material. And it also is their shortest album. I'm pretty sure it's under 30 minutes. Yeah, I will just let you talk about it from there.
I had a hard time finding this one. This is like a aside. What was weird is like, because they also came out with like a cover album this year. Like it was just covers of 80s songs. It was very strange. And it was called something similar. That's an aside, but I don't think it's entirely an aside because this album feels like an emulation of just pop hits. Like it is no way, in absolutely zero way, the soul or the identity of this band that I have come to expect at this point. Now, again, I'm not the biggest Green Day fan. I wouldn't even necessarily call myself a Green Day fan. But of the albums I've listened to, there's like a very specific identity that Green Day carries with them. And this has none of that. It is just absolutely an emulation of sound. It reminded me of like kind of that early 2010s alternative sound. I'm thinking of like some White Stripes influence, like bands in that era of alternative, like late 2000s, early 2010s. And it's just like pop hits, like, and it's not even good pop hits. There's like some, there's some lyrical components that are maybe similar to kind of things I've talked about before, but generally like this thing has no soul. And that's what I found so weird about it. And it was especially weird having known that also they did like an 80s pop cover album this year, which I did listen to a little bit of it. Some of them were actually pretty good covers, but that aside, it's like when I listened to this, I was like, what in the world even is this? Like what are they trying to be? Because they are not trying to be Green Day anymore. And it was just so, frankly, it was bad. Like, I don't know if there's even an out track on here that I enjoyed at all. It was just such an emulation of a style that they cannot do, and they did not do a good job of. Like, I don't get it.
I think calling it soulless is really the best point, because, like, yeah, like, this has no life. It really has none. And it's funny, coming off of Dookie, which is, like, very much a hit machine album, a huge bestseller. It's funny because it feels like that's still what they think they're making on this album. Like, every song packaged to be a radio-ready single. A lot of people have said this about this album, but it's definitely true. A lot of songs ready to be packaged into a car commercial, into an advertisement. Like, it's ready for those things, but like every single song is so trash. Like, it's so trash. 28 minutes of material, and there's not like a good second on it. Like the production is terrible. Not just because it's like, too compressed or whatever, although it is that, but it also just like, it doesn't even sound like it was recorded that well, sometimes. And like the energy and the passion and the personality that Green Day possessed on stuff like Dookie, which I think is a more comparable album to this than American Idiot, because this isn't trying to be super ambitious or whatever. But all of those aspects that made that stuff so good, not only is it not here, but it's like gone to the negative quadrant. Like, if there's like a meter for personality and energy, this has gone lower than 0. And you mentioned the lyrics, but I don't know if you actually gave them a read, because they are horrible. They are honestly some of the worst lyrics I have seen on a major rock record ever. They are very, very bad. And it's funny because the band is almost like trying to imitate like a youthful band on some of these lines. Like there's a song called "I Was a Teenager," which is about how he hates school. And like these guys are like 50 or maybe even well, somewhere around there, 40s, 50s, somewhere around there. And it just doesn't seem like these are topics that they personally have any stake in or care about at all, if they're even trying to touch on a topic.
I would just say that it is very fitting that the cover of this album is a unicorn throwing up on the logo for American Idiot.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. They are indeed defacing their legacy. I appreciate that they kind of, illustrated that artistically with this. Look, okay, this is kind of irrelevant, but this cover art, can we agree this is like one of the worst album arts ever?
It literally is vomit. Like, I'm glad they at least have that on the cover album so you know what you're looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like hard to even talk about it. Like it's so bad. It might not be the worst thing we've ever looked at on this show, but it's close to me, honestly. Like it's just such a nothing thing. Like none of it is good. I can't. It's sad because it's like I can't even think of any defining or at least any features that I even liked, because even a lot of the production was not very good. I didn't feel like a lot of the instrumentation was very good and all that kind of intertwined. It's like I don't even know how to talk about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, it is such an empty husk of an album that we may as well just wrap up here. Honestly, like, what else can you say? It's Father of All by Green Day. It's nothing, like, So yeah, I will let you start with that. So, Dookie, Father of All, and what happened?
Definitely went from good to bad. I think that's without question. Dookie, after having listened to that all the way through, I could easily put that in my top 10 list of albums. Truly, I mean, it is just such a fun experience. Like, that's what it is. I mean, there's a lot of layers to it. I like all the individual components, but ultimately it's just a fun listen. It really is. I don't know how I would compare it to American Idiot because it has been a little while since I've listened to it, but I just really enjoyed my time with that album. Father of All, I did not. I really did not enjoy my time with that album. It is something you can put on the background, and it's not like abrasive to your ears. Like it is listenable, but I would not listen to it pretty much ever. I do not recommend it at all. With that, I give Dookie easily a 10. I can say that without question. I give Father of All, again, it's like, as much as I can't think of any redeeming factors, I don't think it's so bad that I would give it like a 0 or a 1, but it's probably close, like a 1.5 or a 2.
Yeah, all right, well, yeah, as I said, Dookie is a top 10 album for me. I absolutely give it a 10. Just amazing album. And a very personally affirming one for me, too. Really, really, really great. Father of All, I give a 1. It's none of those things.
In fact, it's nothing.
It is indeed nothing. And why are we even talking about it? It doesn't exist. Yeah, what happened? I mean, I obviously have more context to answer that than Steven does that because I've listened to their whole discography. I mean, it was a long time coming, honestly. Like, when Father of All dropped and it was the worst thing ever, it wasn't a surprise. Like, it sucked, but it wasn't like a surprise. It was like, oh, okay, well, that was somewhere they could have gone, I acknowledge. After American Idiot, they put out an album, 21st Century Breakdown, which was essentially like a bigger American Idiot, but not as good at all. Really, really average album. Like, it's a mixed bag for me, but it was not Green Day at their peak, as it probably should have been if they really wanted to outdo themselves like that. And so as a result, they went and did their trilogy of albums, which were actually a lot like Father of All. They were like these really shallow albums with terrible songwriting and terrible lyrics. And I thought that would definitely be their lowest point, especially when they came back with Revolution Radio, which was, it was better. I mean, it still sucked. It was better though, but no, they didn't. So really, what happened, I think, honestly, is just kind of burnout. Like that, there was a lot of passion and hunger in their early material, and all the way up to American Idiot. American Idiot was like a make it or break it album for the band, and if it didn't succeed, they were done. So those albums have that quality to them. It feels like albums that people needed to make, and now they don't. They have nothing to prove, so why even try?
You know what it feels like to me, because I didn't answer why I think what happened. It feels like Green Day saw what Linkin Park, what Fall Out Boy, what Imagine Dragons were able to do, like transition into just pure pop bands for commercialism, for money. I mean, I guess you could say they sold out in the worst way. And it feels like Green Day saw that and they were like, "Oh, we can do that too."
Yeah, I mean, Junkie's Not a High is an Imagine Dragons song. Like when you listen to it, it's straight up an Imagine Dragons song. They absolutely were inspired by Imagine Dragons, no doubt. Yeah, I mean, and you hear it. Well, anyway, I think that about wraps it up for that. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we'll move on to recommendations. Actually, Steven should start. I had those out of order. Not that it matters. But anyway, Steven, what's your recommendation for next time?
So for next time, I'm going to recommend to you a YouTube series. This series is known as Defunct Land. Defunct Land is a YouTube series run by Kevin Bircher. It essentially started as a series where Kevin was going to chronicle and catalog old defunct theme park rides, and then create a quote-unquote Defunct Land, which ultimately became a VR experience. And the reason why I'm bringing it up right now is because the first of those VR experiences has actually just released. It's morphed a bit, and I would say more than a bit since then. But next time we will talk about Defunct Land.
All right, and I apologize. And Steven, I am recommending to you the film Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Pee-wee's Big Adventure is the debut film from Tim Burton, and also, of course, the film breakout for the Pee-wee Herman character. 1987? I didn't look it up. I think something like that. And features the score from Danny Elfman as well, which I feel like we talked about something that all of these... Batman Returns. We just talked about Batman Returns. Yeah, that was a Tim Burton movie with a Danny Elfman score. This is also a Tim Burton movie with a Danny Elfman score.
And both of them had Pee Wee Herman, which is kind of weird.
That's true. They both did. So a lot of similarities there. And that's pretty much all I got for you, and that's what we'll talk about next time. I think, as always, if you are listening here live, you can check us out on CastBox. These episodes tend to go up the night of or the next day as fast as I can get them up onto CastBox, where you can download them and listen to them on the go on your phone. And if you are listening on CastBox, you can check us out on YouTube at Casting404. We actually stream these live, and you can hang out in the live chat while we do them if you would like to do that. So that's, an option for you. And that's all I really have to say.
Yeah, as always, we thank you for listening. We are now on 60 episodes, which is kind of wild.
Yeah,
been doing this for a few years.
Over 3 years now, yeah. Over 3 years.
Which is insane to think about, but thank you for being there with us and listening in.
Yeah, and with that, those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get wrecked.